Hello and welcome to this Jersey Chamber of Commerce hustings for the Connetable rolls for the Connetables of St Mary and St Lawrence. You'll notice there's one face on the screen. Unfortunately, our Connetable candidates for St Lawrence, Emily Joseph and Deirdre Mesburian, couldn't make this. And also the candidate who is the, if you like, the candidate against David Johnson, who's on the screen, Mike Fennell. So Mike Fennell and David Johnson are the candidates for St Mary. David is with us, and with that in mind, we will continue relentlessly and have a one-to-one hustings with David Johnson, who's on the screen at the moment. David, good morning to you. Thanks for joining us this morning. We really appreciate it. Let's just have just 2 minutes on you and your candidacy and your manifesto as such.
Well, thank you, and good morning to you. Thanks for having me on. Yes, I am the current Deputy of St Mary, having first been elected in 2014, re-elected in 2018, and perhaps having regard to the new format of elections, many parishioners approached me to have asked that rather than stand as Deputy in the next election, would I consider being Constable, which is a well-worn route, and I've been pleased to accept that. Especially with the support of other constables in the States now. During my time as Deputy, and you'll recall this yourself, Mary, I have served on the Economic International Affairs Scrutiny Panel, both in 2014 when I was first elected, and again in the more recent term when I ended up being chair of that panel. So that is an area which does interest me, has interested me, and I was pleased to work cooperatively with not only the government, but with Chamber at the time of the COVID crisis. I don't want to stray from my script, not that I have one, but I was unfortunately hospitalised early on in the COVID crisis, and when I came out, I found that we were having regular meetings with your good selves and with the minister, and I think that was a very productive phase of government, and I wish that could have continued perhaps more than has been. But that is where I am. I'm standing as Constable. I'm aware it is a major shift in position, in the sense that I shan't be able to be a member of as many panels as I have been in the last session. But I think there is room for constables to play an active part in government, and not only that, I would actually say that I think the abolition of senators and the elimination, that's not too strong a word, of the dedicated deputies means that they may have an important role to play in the States, and I like to think that I am well positioned to achieve that on behalf of my parish.
Thank you, David. That was a good, nice, full-rounded 2 minutes. Thank you very much indeed for that. You've alluded to the difference between moving from being a deputy to putting yourself up as a candidate for Connetable. Where do you really see those differences are going to be? You mentioned there less panel work, because obviously there's more parishional work to go on. So where do you see the difference and the shift?
I think it's a major difference. I'm not sure everyone understands it. I think as deputy, one does not really get involved in parish administration. And I'm aware that there are cases where there have been problems between constable and deputy if one strays too far in that area. So that has suited me previously. I've been free to join as many panels as I wanted to, or they would have me on. But the role of the constable is very much father or mother of the parish, and in fact, I was only yesterday speaking to a retired farmer who would have us believe that constables should not be in the States, that they should concentrate purely on their parishes, leaving the politics to others. I think that might well have been the case some years ago. It is not now, but certainly constables' main priority has to be the conduct of the parish, which in a way is akin to running a small or maybe not so small business. and that in itself, of necessity, does not leave as much room as the deputy has for being on other panels. But I think if the will of the island and many people in the island is that to preserve the parish system, then I think constables have a duty to take that parish system into the States, and they can't simply sit in their parish halls and rule from there. So yes, I see further involvement and greater involvement by constables in government, as we've seen actually over the last few years. I think we have had constables take on very responsible positions.
Now, you're one of two candidates there for St Mary's Conetable, and along, as I mentioned before, with Mike Fennell. You've served in the States, as you say, for two previous sessions. I wanted to talk about some of the issues that chamber members find most relevant at the moment, and as you might expect, they're around recruitment and around population and possibly housing as well. So let's take population as not a small subject to start with there. Do you think that the government are getting this about right with the population policy that we have, or would you like to see some changes to that?
Well, it's a movable feast. It's ongoing, isn't it? I did, in preparing my speech for my Hustings tomorrow, I look back to my previous Hustings when I identified the main issue for the next term being the island plan, thinking cleverly as I thought that to solve the island plan, you first have to deal with the interconnecting items of population, housing, environment, and so much more. In fact, that COVID intervened, and we have been left with a bridging island plan, which ducks certain of those issues. So we are, I think it probably was correct to have a bridging plan, and maybe with some reluctance, maybe it was correct to defer a root and branch review of population, given that we've yet to come to terms with what Brexit is going to produce and the outcome of COVID. But back to your general point, there is flexibility within the system. And I think that one area which gets a lot of publicity, perhaps too much, is the number of the wealthy immigrants who come in. I won't be hypocritical here. During my legal career, we acted for many, and going back some years, it was never contentious. 10 or 12 families a year coming in, paying then tax at full rate of 20%, was not skewing the housing market. That it's also, I think, fair to say that the immigrants, that's the right word, or the newcomers of that era were probably older than they are today. They were content to buy their one house and stay put. The newer format is that they are very much of working age, they wish to work, and also, and this is where I do think something ought to be done, they are able to buy other property on the island and develop it, and irrespective of whether that produces income to the island in the form of tax on the sale proceeds or stamp duty, I think that does actually is a socially divisive matter, and I would like to see wealthy immigrants not being able to buy any properties other than any residential properties other than their own. As far as other working population is concerned, we again, as you may recall, the economics panels recently conducted a review into agricultural workers' residents, and that I think was useful for us and for the farming fraternity. We have to be seen to be welcoming those who come here, and I think actually that the 9-month rule does not, as I understand it, actually present too much of a problem. Workers are prepared to take that. It suits the farming fraternity well. I'm less sure of the situation when it comes to hospitality, which is we need them, and you know better than I that there's a shortage of qualified staff out there, and I think basically that perhaps is as a result partly of Brexit and partly because the population as a whole may undervalue that category of worker, and we need to, I think, come to grips with the fact that meals out, etc., are going to have to be more expensive.
One parishioner to St Mary has said that whilst it's a small parish and there are businesses, there are still businesses that suffer from the lack of staff due to the recruitment crisis. And part of that recruitment crisis is housing, in terms of housing staff that come into the island. So the question from one of your parishioners is, would you support addressing finding suitable accommodation solutions for such workers and providing them with health cover from day one of their employment? As you might recall, health cover for those coming into work, say for a 6-month contract, well, their health cover doesn't start until after 6 months. So if they're on a 9-month contract, their health cover doesn't start for the first 6 months. So that's the one issue. And the other issue, of course, is staff accommodation. And sometimes businesses are able to recruit, but they have no staff accommodation to put them in. So those are a couple of issues that are being laid as a candidate as Connetables of St Mary at your foot at the moment. So are those things that you will support?
Well, certainly on dealing first with the 6-month period, it is universal that you cannot obtain social security benefits until you've been here for 6 months. And that in a way is fair. I think, again, by way of example, we did key into that in our review of agricultural workers, because where they have been here for 9 months, and then go away again, when they come back, there are going to be periods where they're not covered, and that seemed to be sort of unfair. We did have a exchange with Social Security Minister on this. I think that it does depend on what period your illness falls in, and it's not as black and white as no cover during that time. There is a situation where if you fall ill during the wrong period of employ, that you will not be covered, and that does need to be addressed. And I think the farming fraternity say they have covered that by taking out private health insurance during that time. As far as accommodation is concerned, that is a big problem. Again, you'll know better than I. I'm told that part of the problem relates to actually the upgrading of some accommodation. Lodging houses have largely disappeared, with the increased standards, which has to be right. So the price comes up, and there's simply not the availability. I like to think that, I know it's fairly recently that we discussed the Bridging Island plan, but various sites have been identified there for development. I think, push what I think is a widely held belief that a lot of stakes property could have been better developed over the years. It is in the public ownership, and better use should be made of it. It's not being used to its full advantage. And the other point I was going to suggest has slipped my mind. Well, certainly you talk about accommodation. I'm not quite sure what area you're talking about, but if we talk about key workers, like, again, all these things interact. Healthcare has to be a major concern for us going forward. And as was pointed out to us, what's the point in building a very expensive hospital if we're not going to get the stuff to service it? And again, very recently had cause to, or remember, my family had cause to use an ambulance driver. They're having to bring them in as temporary workers from the UK. They give them temporary accommodation, a room in the hospital, and this cannot be good for a sustainable workforce in that industry. I think there will be more sympathy for providing key accommodation to health workers than there will be for some other walks of life, like waiters and waitresses. But yeah, I do not know what well, I don't think there is an immediate solution, but hopefully that with accommodation being made available, or with sites being made available, it will gradually come to be cured. I think also, sorry, I'm rattling on here, but the other aspect, of course, is the number of people we do recruit from the UK or elsewhere. Could they be found locally? I appreciate that at Highlands, etc., we are beginning to produce our own skilled workers, but that takes a while to come through. And I think we do have to look quite hard at the number of officers we do recruit from the UK, and as to whether they are strictly necessary and whether we cannot train up existing personnel, because apart from the housing, there is a social divisiveness, I think, which is beginning to pervade the island, that any worker who comes here should be very much welcomed. It's not healthy if they feel there is resentment that they are taking up someone else's place.
Okay, let's move from that subject to the subject of the tourism industry and the hospitality industry. I'm thinking again in St Mary there that relates in terms of both hotels and venues and event space, and of course coastline. The hospitality industry and the tourism industry inextricably linked. We've seen the loss of some routes recently, Jet2 noticeably reducing their routes that they've only just started this year. Do you see a huge value in the bed stock that we have in the island? Because that seems to be dropping quite a bit. What do you what's your thought on tourism and the value of tourism to our island?
Well, sorry, I think I'm having trouble with my loudspeaker here, and I pick you up. But if the question was trouble in recruiting hospitality workers, is that?
Well, no, more about the value of tourism to the island in terms of what we have, and the worry that might be waning slightly.
Well, yes, I mean, I think, again, I've been on the island for getting on for 50 years, and in crude terms, when I first came here, one was looking at revenue from industries of finance, agriculture, horticulture, and tourism in roughly equal proportions. And as you say, finance now has far outstripped the other two. I think we first of all got to identify what we mean by tourism. I think it is not just people coming over for a week on the beach. Tourism does embrace businessmen who come here, who stay here, who need good facilities. It embraces people who come here for culture. And I think we need to expand into those areas. I know for a while the idea has been to make better use of the shelter months, but it is no longer the resort of, I know, 20 years ago, where some people called it rather unfairly the bucket and spray brigade. Yes, we were a rival to resorts on the coasts of Lancashire and Yorkshire and elsewhere. And of course, with the ferry companies then being owned by British Rail, we had a ready market in their own employees. Holiday standards are now more demanding. A lot of the smaller hotels have given up. I think in the island plan there were moves in some areas to try and prevent hotels giving up and to ensure that they stayed on. But that I think was impractical, given that if they are being financed by banks, etc., the value of the property would immediately decline, and certainly and as far as any new venture was concerned, finance houses are unlikely to be willing to lend when they think that there is that there's not going to be a free market at the end of the day. So yeah, I think there are some new hotels have been built. I think personally, I think we are short of, well, I'm not sure where the conference industry is going now. There was a time when it was blossoming and we could accommodate them in Hotel de France, for instance. I had experience fairly recently of trying to find a venue for comps about 60 or 80 people. And there was, in peak months, was just no possibility of doing it. And we had to shift it around to accommodate it. I know that there are new hotels coming in. I think we need to perhaps be more proactive, and for heaven's sake, let's do something with Fort Regent, which could be a major tourist attraction for all sorts of people.
Yeah. I'm going to go back to the parish very slightly for a moment, because you are now a candidate, one of two candidates for the parish of St Mary Connetables. What are the issues that you think are the most important in St Mary?
I think what I'm hearing actually is, well, I think there are two. One is the competing interests of keeping the parish green, yet the need to attract more people to it, to make sure it's not just a parish for the elderly population. In the same afternoon, I see comments from different households, one being that why don't you, I don't want to increase rates. The other being, why do we have the highest rates in the parish? The reason we have the highest rates in the parish is, of course, we have very few houses we can extract rates from. And a major expenditure is our roads, which I don't want to go off piste, as it were, but these are roads which the whole of the island use as a cut through. And I think that's perhaps for the Comité des Connetables in due course. I would like to see a better share out and more support given the parishes for parish roads, which are used not for parishioners, but the island as a whole. The speeding remains an issue, but perhaps not as great as it was 5 or 6 years ago. But the other aspect, I think, is a social one. There are parishioners who believe that perhaps mainly as a result of COVID, the level of connectivity has been reduced over the period. I'm sure other parishes would make the same claim, but I recall not that long ago when St Mary claimed to be the happiest parish in the island. I question whether that is the case now. Certainly, there are those parishioners who want a greater community spirit to be engendered, and yes, and certainly I would do all I can to infuse that, to get parishioners more involved, and myself to get more involved with parishioners and their views on matters. I mean, at the moment, having been a deputy yourself, you'll know that one of the most prolific times for receiving comments from one's parishioners is the night before a state's assembly, when you get a missive saying, would you please vote for or against? And one respects those views, but there are other missives coming in with a contrary opinion, and frequently there's been no debate as within the parish, and they've not been able to fully understand. That's not a complaint about parishioners, but there could and should be more dialogue. And I'm hoping that if I was elected constable, to have sort of more informal assemblies, maybe after the formal ones, to discuss anything and everything, to get a better feel for what parishioners are looking for.
There's always a pressure on the country parishes to play their part in what has been described as the housing crisis. You have St Helier and, to some extent, of course, St Saviour and St Clement as those very, very built up, much more so, densely populated parishes. So the pressure on a parish such as St Mary, less dense than all of the others in terms of population, I just wonder if the housing pressures on St Mary are being felt, and whether St Mary itself is happy with its lot and wants to try and limit the amount of development in the parish.
Yeah, I well understand the point you make. Again, when I first joined the States, same time as you, I was a bit worried about the attitude to St Mary in relation to housing, and I was, very much comforted, and I applaud the deputies of St Helier for agreeing that housing should be a priority and they should prioritise it in St Helier. And ever since then, I've taken the view that St Helier should be supported in its quest for open spaces. I've also taken the view that St Mary, as a green parish, and call it that, is not just for the parishioners of St Helier, of St Mary. It is there for the good of all. To address your particular point, you'll be aware that in the recent Bridging Island debate, the present consul put forward two propositions regarding provision of housing or provision of green fields in some area to be used for housing. The one is perhaps more, and sorry, I should say also that that caused quite a spate of emails objecting to one of them in particular. Of those two, one is a strip of land immediately behind a present development, and I think that I can see where the concept was coming from. We need to do our bit, and whilst I know it will be offensive to some because it is used as agricultural right now, it is a lesser loss. The other one was a green field almost in the centre of the parish, and the inspector himself said it was in the core of the village and should not be built upon. And that particular proposition to allow it for housing was comprehensively defeated, I'm pleased to say. But again, there are these twin pressures. We can't, I think we need to look carefully for further sites. I think there probably are some around, but not on a big virgin green field. It might be more economic to deal with that way, but I would hope there are individual sites elsewhere which might be built up. But as you say, it is we do feel the pressure. I feel the pressure. It's a moral responsibility on the one hand to provide accommodation for our young people and to prevent them leaving the island. On the other, we have a responsibility to keep the island green for everyone. And again, I repeat, because the term NIMBYism has been used quite often of late. I'm straying from your question, but the recent planning application to build a residence down at Greve de Lec, which has involved the closure of that, what was used as a public car park, although it actually wasn't one, is going to cause problems. And I say that on behalf not of St Mary residents only, but I know that at weekends in the summer there were certain sections of the community who basically camped out there for the weekend, and it's people in St Helier who are losing out there as much as anyone else. And I do take their interest very much to heart, even though I am deputy of the smallest parish in the island.
Well, we're forever grateful for St Mary for letting us in. I think that's very generous of you at times. Let me just touch on a couple of much broader subjects before we close. And we said we do a one-to-one hustling for half an hour, and we're at that half an hour stage. Just a couple of quick questions for you. One is on GST on food. It's been raised on numerous occasions during this election. Is that something that you would adjust, or is that something that you would keep GST as it is? Would you remove it from basic food?
Yeah, GST, I think, again, that was during the rounds when I first sought election, I think. And it has to remember that GST, or whatever its equivalent is in other countries, at 5% is the lowest, I think, rate going in the world or amongst it. And we should be mindful of that. I think that if I do see an argument for reducing GST on food, but I think if it is to be done, we have to balance the book somewhere, and I think that will probably mean increasing it on other items. It is also one has to also look at the cost of administering any tax. I'm told it's a fairly simple tax to collect, inexpensive to collect, and the more exemptions we have, the more complex it will be, the more personnel we will need to employ to work this through. So I'm not giving you a definitive decision. I think if GST comes off food, I think it will almost definitely be at the expense of it being raised on other things, and maybe that is a price we have to pay.
Yeah. One thing you'll know as an experienced campaigner of being in the States Assembly is that the Connetables very often are the key or the answer to getting a vote across the line one way or the other. And convincing the Connetable bloc, as it's sometimes called, can be a very, very enticing and challenging proposition for other states members to convince the Connetables to vote one way or another. I just wonder what your thoughts are on the electoral map that we now have of deputy constituencies, which are much larger, and the Connetables, but no senators, no island-wide vote. Many have commented on previous hustings of parishioners saying, well, I would vote for you, not their parishioners, I would vote for you, but you're not in my constituency and I haven't got an island-wide vote. Do you mourn the loss of an island-wide vote? Is that something you'd like to see come back?
Yep, I not happy, but I willingly say that I basically went along with most of the proposed amendments against the electoral system in the form we now have. I certainly, as far I think that looking at it from the point of view of St Mary residents, and I have this time and again, they do mourn the loss of the island-wide vote, because that removes the connectivity they have with government as a whole. Time was when you could almost assume that the 12 senators, as they were at one time, would hold the key positions, whether it's heads of committee or as ministers. And therefore, yes, when you were voting, you realised that you actually were responsible for putting someone into a position. Recently, I think at the last count, I think only 3 senators were ministers at the end of the last parliament, the rest being taken by deputies. So we already had a situation that deputies who had no mandate from other members of Ireland were holding key positions. And that, I think, is found to be frustrating. And so in that respect, I think an island-wide mandate would help. There's the other aspect. I think that the island is very much based on parish lines at the moment. And though those in the parish perhaps quite rightly believe that anyone from St Mary who stands as deputy stands less chance of getting in than his counterpart in the 2 larger parishes of St Peter and so on. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but that's certainly a widely held view, and it certainly has to be more likely that if you are in St Peter, you will know the person from St Peter standing and have a better idea who he is. So yes, I think a lot of St Mary people feel that they have been disenfranchised on 2 counts. I'm leaping into your other problem before you turn me off. As to constables, I think that, yes, I think it may be that the advent of parties, political parties, will make them vote more in a block way, but I'm not sure. I think that certainly what you say is right. I think over the years, a long time ago, constables were inclined to vote en bloc. I think there's less of that now. Say constables have held ministerial office in the last government, and they have other allegiances as well. So I think that certainly my own view is that a constable should not be a member of a party, but I know at least one differs on that. So we will see. But I think constables will, I think, to preserve the parish system, I think constables, as one said, will need to come up to the mark this time and make their voices felt. And I'd like to be one of those.
David Johnson, thank you very much indeed for giving us some time today. I really appreciate it. I appreciate your frankness and your honesty with your answers. And we should remind people that in the parish of St Mary, there is another candidate, and that other candidate is Mike Fennell. And in the parish of St Lawrence, Deirdre Mesburian and Emily Joseph are standing there. Unfortunately, due to other commitments, they weren't able to join us today, but we thank them and wish them well, as we wish you well. And whoever is elected at the Jersey Chamber of Commerce, we look forward to working with them. David, thank you very much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me on and for your patience. Thank you.
Thank you.